So I am Rev Alice Reid, and I want to welcome you to our Sunday gathering this morning. We may not be together physically, but we are certainly together in the ethers and through this broadcast on YouTube Live. So thank you for joining us. This month's theme is Mindfulness for Mavericks. And when you look up the term maverick, it really speaks to this idea of unorthodoxy. So when I think about mindfulness, I think about this being clearly and consciously centered in my thoughts, feeling that alignment within my own body temple and within my mind and my heart. And yet now we want to bring in this idea of being a maverick, being unorthodox in our mindfulness. And I think these times that we're in really call for that. And if I was to be a little playful, I think I would prefer that we're spiritual badasses right now. That we are really willing to push into what we used to know and to begin to explore what wants to be known. And for me, that's what this idea of mindfulness for Mavericks means. The theme for this month might be mindfulness for Mavericks, but each week we're going to be looking at an idea behind mindfulness. And so this week will be intentions, next week we'll be looking at our words, and then the following week we'll be looking at our actions. And so the talk topic today is Conscious Evolutionary Activation. Whew, that's a big term. But all it really means is being really evolutionary with our intentions. When I think about intentions, I think about the rudder in a boat. If you've ever been sailing, when I was a girl, my father used to take me sailing on the Long Island Sound, and he would let me steer the boat. And you could imagine, as a small child, the idea of being able to steer a boat was a bit overwhelming. But he simply said, even though the water is vast and wide, that all I needed to do was to find some place on the landscape and begin to move the rudder so that I would point the boat in that direction. And so it gave me this sense that we were moving in a certain direction, but gave me lots of room to navigate as we moved toward that direction. And when I think about that experience as a child, I think that's what we mean by intentions, that the world has lots of different things to get our attention. There's lots of opportunities for us to get distracted, but if we can keep our attention focused in the direction of our intention, then we begin to move in a certain direction. Many of you who've taken classes with me know that one of my favorite quotes is from Socrates. And Socrates was asked by the student, "How do I get to Mount Olympus?" And Socrates simply answered, "Make sure every step is in that direction." Make sure every step is in that direction. And this is what intentions do for us. They help us to align ourselves to our values, to align ourselves to things that are important, and begin to point ourselves in a certain direction. Now, when I think about what's going on in the world today and all the upheaval for the last 2.5 weeks, we've been watching as our nation has been rising up to say no to racism. And I bet if you're like me, you might be puzzling about how to approach what's going on as a religious scientist. How do we apply our philosophy and our teaching to what's going on in the world? How do we keep it relevant? For a century, our philosophy has been focused on creation. And when we begin to engage with this philosophy and this teaching and this way of life, oftentimes we're engaging at the level of the individual, creation at the level of the individual. But I think sometimes we forget that we create at the level of the collective as well. That there is a larger thing happening right here and right now. It isn't just about me. It's about us. It's about humanity. And we have to actually work at both levels. We have to work at the level of the individual, but we have to remember that there's a level of the collective that we're also responsible for. And when I think about what we may have collectively created, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? I mean, climate change, divisive leadership, poverty and hunger, and homelessness. None of us would sit down and say that those were things that we wanted to create. But at some level, we have created them in the collective. And more recently, the pandemic, massive unemployment, and a greater awareness of racism. All of these things are effects. All of these things are conditions. They are not the power and the presence of that creative source, but they are conditions that have been created as source moves through us collectively. And I would say that they've been created because we've been operating at the level of what Troward might call secondary causation, where we invest ourselves in a condition and then we begin to think that that is the place where we need to create from. Holmes gives us a really great quote that I think is apropos here. From the Living the Science of the Mind, he says, "The power that creates exists before we use it. However, it can give us only that which we mentally take. And often, our unbelief becomes our acceptance, our fear, a misplaced faith." Fear as a misplaced faith. Think about it. You know, when fear is that secondary causation place that we might reach to, not realizing we can reach beyond that to a greater power, and we begin to create from that place. And so I think that's how we create things like climate change and coronavirus and racism. I recently read a beautiful article in the National Review. Now, for those of you who know publications out there, the National Review is a very conservative publication. And yet this article was so relevant, and I felt really spoke to the issue of racism at the level of our values. The author talked about how our nation was founded on very high ideals. Ideals that, while beautiful, didn't apply to all. We said they did, but they didn't. So if you'll change to the next slide, please. I want to share with you the first few lines of the Declaration of Independence. And today being Flag Day, it seems like a perfect day to look at our Declaration of Independence. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with one another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separate. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration goes on to say that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Take that in for a minute. These were powerful words that were crafted almost 250 years ago. And I'm certain that our founding fathers, when they crafted these words, there was a lot of discussion. There was a lot of talking about what was important and how could they get to the highest value that they could agree upon. The problem is that some of the people who agreed upon this statement were not in alignment with these very words, as they were slave owners. And so I'd like to propose that you consider that as our founding fathers created this beautiful country with the highest ideals that we could live by, that there was some incongruency in them. That there were individuals that weren't in alignment with these values to such a degree that it affected their actions, and that they continued to operate through their fear, that they continued to make choices based on limiting ideas. And of course, those choices were to enslave individuals, to work for them, to help create their wealth, to help run their farms, at the diminishment of the slave's well-being. Now, I know that probably none of us, nobody listening to this broadcast certainly, would ever condone such behavior 244 years later. Nobody would want to be a slave owner and to create an experience for an African American that was so egregious. But the reason I bring this up is because I think it's really relevant today for us to look at this idea that there was a high intention that was set by our founding fathers, and yet it is the sins of our fathers, the sins of our founding fathers, knowing that sin really represents missing the mark. It was the sins of our fathers that created this country, and we built on top of those sins. And we created on top of that incongruency. And therefore, everything that we have created has been touched by that. I wouldn't go so far as to say tainted, but I would say touched by that. And so I think we have to come face to face with what has been layered upon layer upon layered in our country, and understand that while there are many demonstrations going on right now, the reason is that we have woken up and that our awareness is coming up, and that we're calling this out. We're calling this grave mistake of having a high ideal and then not taking actions that were in alignment with that ideal. We need to call that out and bring that to our awareness, because when we set intentions, it requires that we take every step in the direction of those intentions. Congruency is what creates, and that greater alignment is what brings us into a alignment with the creative power. Many of you who come here on Sunday you have seen this next chart that I want to share with you. It's the creative process chart. And in the creative process, you'll see that we have 3 layers of that creative process. And oftentimes the way I refer to it is the seed, the soil, and the plant. We plant a seed of truth into the soil of the subjective or our beliefs, and it creates our experience. And so what I know is that Declaration of Independence created and planted the seeds of freedom and equality and liberty, but it had to travel through fear and lack and limiting ideas. And the result, now you'll notice I haven't been focusing on the positive things because they're pretty obvious. There is great freedom in our country. There are there is an ability for us as citizens to, we have so much freedom and liberty, but it doesn't work for all of us. There's a good portion of our population that feels oppressed, that lives in poverty, that deals with racism on a daily basis. And so I bring this up for you. I share this model with you because I think we all need to be more aware of what's in our subjective, what's in the subconscious, and to tease it out and to get clearer and to make intentions that we're willing to back up with actions so that we create this world that works for everyone. Theodore Johnson, who wrote that wonderful article in the National Review, writes, "A new normal that will alter the American way of life in some significant fashion awaits." As a nation, we need to do our shadow work. I'm really clear personally. I have a spiritual practice where I do my own shadow work. I look for those things that are hidden from my own view, and I try to tease them out, and I try to get clearer. And what that does for me is it creates a greater alignment with Source, and my life then seems to work in greater alignment with the things that I value. And I think as a nation, we need to do that as well. I think as a nation, we have to face the sins of our father. We have to see where any thread of that continues to live in us so that we can bring it up to the light and we can allow it to be cleared so that all men know that they are free, that all our citizens, not only in our country but around the world, know that they are equal. This is a worthy value. It's worthy of our time. It's worthy of our attention. And it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be painful. But it's going to be worth it. And so I'm going to invite you over the next couple of months during the summer. We'll be offering some workshops, some book studies, and some ways for us to continue to press in. Because underneath all of this unrest that we're experiencing right now are those immutable qualities of love and freedom and beauty and joy. And I want them for myself as much as I want them for you, as much as I want them for everybody. And that's what we mean by a world that works for all. I'm reminded of a couple of passages from the Bible, and one is to love your neighbor, and the other is to be my brother's keeper. And so as we press into the uncomfortable space of looking at racism, at looking at what might still live in our subjective, I encourage you to keep those two guiding principles in front of you, to love our neighbor and to be our brother's keeper. Thank you for joining us this morning. I want to go ahead and take us to that place of prayer where we can know our oneness with one another. So join me if you will. There is indeed a power and a presence that moves in as and through all life. I know this presence to be God. I know this presence to be love. I know this presence to be freedom, equality, joy, and wholeness. I trust that as we press into the uncomfortable places, as we press into those places where we might be feeling like this doesn't feel like oneness, it feels like separation. The truth is that we are simply moving through the shadow towards the light. And so I know for each one within the sound of my voice that we move forward, we take steps forward with an open heart and an open mind. We trust that anything that we bring up, that we heal within ourselves, we heal for the good of all. That there is a call to action, and that we press in to find out what is ours to do, what action is ours to take, what intention is it that we need to set for ourselves so that we can indeed live in a world that works for everyone. It is with a grateful heart that I speak this word, knowing that we are connected at such a deep level, even while being separated through this coronavirus. And I trust love will lead the way. And I trust that law will make it possible. It is with a grateful heart that I speak this word into the action of that very same law, and I know that all are lifted, all are healed, all are having a greater revelation of wholeness, and that whatever's in the way dissolves when we present love to it, when we present wholeness to it. And so it is with gratitude that I simply release this word, knowing it is done. And so it is.